I hope that you're well and that you had an amazing day. All right, so before we start with our lesson for today, can everybody log into the A plus students.ca? All right, then we're going to log in with your username as well as your password. All right, so once you've logged in with your username as well as your password, then you're going to select the subject of language arts. And then we go to grade 1. All right, so once we have selected language arts, grade 1, now we're going to scroll down to verb tenses. So we're going to focus on the chapter of verb tenses. All right, so once we are in the chapter of verb tenses, our lessons for today is select the sentence that tells us about the verb, select the sentence that tells us about the past, as well as selecting the sentence that tells us about the future. All right, let's bring this down. All right, so now we said that we are doing verb tenses, right? And some verbs, it tells us about something that has happened already, right? And especially when we're talking about tenses, and then we are talking about the present tense, which has happened, which is happening now, the past tense, which had happened in the past, and the future tense, which basically will still happen, right? So that is usually the verb tenses that we are talking about. So some verbs, it tells us about something that has happened already, and whether it is in the present, which is now, the past, it happened already, or in the future, meaning that it must still happen, right? All right, so now we're going back to the tutorial page. So once we are at the tutorial of verb tenses, we're going to do the first lesson, which is select the sentence that tells us about the present, right? So the present is something that is happening now, right? All right, so some verbs, oh, pardon. So some verbs tell us, they tell about something that has already happened, right? And these verbs tell about the past. So if something happened already, then we then say that it happened in the past, right? And usually, if something happened in the past, right, then we end the word in ed, right? So basically, the verb then ends in ed. For example, we walked to school today. So today you walk to school, right? But in the past, which is yesterday, so we walked at an ed to the store yesterday, right? So yesterday we walked, and there we add the ed. The show started last week. Start, add the ed. Started last week, right? And that is basically just examples of verbs that tell us about the past, right? They end in ed. Then we also have some verbs that tell us about the present, right? Then we have some verbs that tell us about the present. So some verbs tell us about something that is happening now. right? So anything that is happening now, we then say that is the present, right? They usually have no ending. So the present doesn't have an ending, right? Or they will just end in is, right? So it does not, when we say it as no ending, then for example, like with the past tense, it ends with ed, right? Whereas present tense, it has no ending, meaning we don't have to say it ends with ed or it ends with ing, for example, right? But some of the verbs that tell us about the present, they sometimes end in is, right? An example is we walk to school today, right? So today we walk to school. The parade starts now. So you don't say the parade start now. We say the parade starts now, right? And these words, there we have the one that ends in is, and then we have the other one that has basically no ending, right? And these are all examples of verbs that tell us about the present. All right, then some verbs that tell us about something that is going to happen, right? So something that is going to happen, right? And we call that future tense, right? So these verbs tell us about the future, and they will use the word will. So if you talk about the future, things that must still happen or stuff that is going to happen, then we can then basically use will within the sentence. The word will. Will, right? An example of that is, so we're basically going to put will in front of the verb, right? And here we have a few examples. We will walk to the park next week, right? Or the party will start soon, right? And there we also have the word will. And the word will in front of the verb, they tell us about the future. It tells us about something that is going to happen. All right, so basically that is explaining tenses, right? And even though I gave you an explanation of tenses in the present, in the future, as well as the past, right? But for now, we are only to select the sentence that tells us about the present, right? And the present, it is something that is happening now. And remember, we said it either has no ending or it ends in is, right? And that is the present. All right. Okay, so let's look at this one. If we look at the first sentence over here, it says, look at the verb in each sentence. Which one tells us about the present, right? Remember, the present is something that is happening now, right? At the show, we sit next to each other. So at the show, we sit next to each other, right? So basically, the verb sit, it has no ending, right? It tells us about the present. And it's also telling us about something that is happening now, right? We sit next to each other, right? That is happening now. It tells us about the present. All right. The next one. The next one says they will fix food for the picnic. All right. So if we look at the word will fix, right? Will fix. They will fix food for the picnic. That means that it's telling us about that is going to happen, meaning it is the future. So the verb will fix has the word will, and it tells us about something that is going to happen, right? And it tells us about the future. You look at both of the sentences, right? here it says, the one says, which one tells us about the present, all right? Which means that the first one tells us about the present, right? Because the second one with will, with the word will in, it tells us about the future. It tells us about something that is going to happen. But the first one, at the show, we sit next to each other. It tells us about the present, something that is happening now. All right, look at the next, these two sentences. Look at the verb in each sentence. So we specifically need to look at the verb because the verb will then tell us whether it is present, whether it is past, or if it is future, right? So which one tells us about the present? Is it she draws two eyes and a nose? Or I will write a story about some animals. All right, so the first one says she draws two. So draws two eyes and a nose, right? So which means that this verb only ends in S. So if it only ends in S, then we can then say that it tells us about something that is happening now. It tells us about the present. So it is the present tense. It is something that is currently happening. And the second one says, I will write a story about some animals. Write. Will write, right? So the verb will, right, has will in, and remember we said that once we have the word will in front of the verb, and then it tells us about something that is going to happen. I will write, and it tells us about the future. So now the first question says, look at the verb in each sentence. Which one tells us about the present? And we can then clearly say the first option tells us about the present. She draws two eyes and a nose. And the second one tells us about the future. All right, let's look at the next one. We need to look at the verb in each sentence. Which one tells us about the present, right? Because remember, we need to select. The initial lesson tells us to select the sentence that tells us about the present, right? All right, so if we go to the last one, it says, Tess and Blake work near my school. So Tess and Blake work near my school, right? So the verb work. Tess and Blake work near my school. Right. So this verb work, it has no ending, right? And remember we said the verbs within the present tense, right? It either has no ending or it ends with s, right? So in this case, the verb work has no ending at all. It tells us about something that is happening now, right? They work near my school now. And it also tells us about the present, which means that it is happening right now, right? And then the second option is or the second sentence is, we will jump on three, right? So the word will in front of that verb, will jump, right? So will jump, it tells us about something that is going to happen, right? Meaning that it tells us about the future. So the initial question is, look at the verb in each sentence. Which one tells us about the present? Which means that the first sentence tells us about the present, right? Tess and Blake work, something that they're doing now near my school. All right. So that is the to select the sentence that tells us about the present, right? And remember we said that the present is something that is happening now. and it usually has no ending or it ends with S, right? So if you look at this page in front of us, this picture that says verb tense chart, right? We're only going to look at the first one, that is past tense, present tense, future tense, but the simple one, right? All right. So if we look at the past tense one, right? Or let's start at the present tense. It says, I walk to the store, right? I walk to the store. That verb walk has no ending, right, at all. And this basically shows something that is happening now, right? And we call that present tense. Then we have the past tense. And the past tense says, I walked to the store. Something that has happened already, right? And also the verb ends in ed. Walked to the store. And then here we have the future tense, which is I will walk to the store, right? I will walk to the store, right? Meaning the word will in front of the verb tells us that it is something that is going to still happen, right, in the future. It hasn't happened yet. And that is verb tenses chart. And we are only focusing on the simple one, right? All right, so now we are going to do a little activity. All right, we're going to do a little activity and it says present tense verb. When the subject is singular, right, then we add s. So if the subject, right, the person that we are talking about, is singular, then we add s to the verb for present tense, except I and you, right? When the subject is plural, right, more than one, the verb forms does not change, right? Meaning it has no ending at all, right? All right, so let's look at the first one, right? We are going to choose the correct present tense verb for each sentence. So we are going to choose the correct one within the box and then we will circle it. My brother is it play piano or my brother plays piano? So we need to choose the correct verb tense, or let's say basically verb form that fits with this sentence. And remember, we said when the subject is singular, we add an s, but when the subject is plural, we don't have an end word or letter. All right, so my brother, we are going to say my brother plays. My brother plays piano, right? The students, is it write neatly or the students writes neatly? We need to choose the best verb that fits within the sentence correctly. All right. And remember, they said that if the subject is plural, the verb form does not change. So it's going to be the students write neatly. Jill loves to eat pizza, or Jill love to eat pizza. We need to choose the correct verb. All right, so Jill loves to eat pizza. Remember, they said when the subject is singular, then we add an S. The cat, is it chase the mouse or the cat chases the mouse? The cat chases the mouse or the cat chases the mouse, right? So we're going to say the cat chases the mouse. The subject is singular, we add an S, right? Bill get angry at the man or Bill gets angry at the man. We need to choose the correct verb that fits in within the sentence. All right, so we're going to say Bill gets angry at the man because we said if the subject is singular, just like Bill, then we add the S, like gets. You, is it you get what you wish or you gets what you wish? All right, so we're going to say you get what you wish. And we specifically said use the word get because as much as you is singular, right? But here it says when the subject is singular, we add an S to the verb for present tense, except I and you, right? So the you. So we leave it with no form, right? So the form doesn't change. Is it we eat or eats fruit for a snack. So we eats fruit for a snack or we eat fruit for a snack. We need to choose the correct verb that fits within the sentence. All right, so we're going to say we eat fruit for a snack, right? Which means that here it says when the subject is plural, like we, right? We is more than one person. So so when the subject is plural, the verb does not change, right? So it just stays the same. We do not add the S to it, right? So that is basically the present tense verb. All right, so now we're going back to the tutorial and then we are going to do the little test. And now it says that we need to select the sentences that tells us about the present, right? So which sentence tells us about the she thinks about her trip all the time. We will paint our room blue. We were going to go to the pool. I washed the dishes. So we need to choose the correct present tense or correct sentence that tells us about the present, something that is happening now. That she thinks about her trip all the time. We will paint our room blue. We were going to go to the pool, or I washed the dishes. We need to choose the correct sentence that tells us about the present. All right, so we're going to choose the first option, right? She thinks about her trip all the time, right? It is telling us about what she's doing now, right? She is thinking or she thinks about the trip all the time. The second option has will in, right? So will paint, meaning that that is the future, needs to still happen. We were going, right? Were going to the pools, right? That is the past. And I washed the dishes, right? Is also the past. So we are going to choose the first option. So well done. All right, the second one. I will walk to the zoo. I live in that yellow house. He walked the dog. Robin will be joining us. Which sentence tells us about the present? I will walk to the zoo. I live in that yellow house. He walked the dog. Robin will be joining us. All right, so we are going to choose I live in that yellow house, right? Because it's something he's basically living there now, right? It is happening now. I will walk is the future because the word will before the verb tells us that it is the future, must still happen. He walked, the verb ends in ed, tells us about the past, and Robin will be joining us, tells us about the future. So we are going to choose the second option. I live in that yellow house. All right, so if you have that, then well done. Okay, so we're going to do the last one. Liz and her friends jump high. I will talk to Nina. She lived in Paris. They watched that movie at the cinema. We need to choose the correct sentence that tells us about the present, something that is happening now. All right, so let us quickly choose one, right? So I'm going to say she lived in Paris, right? So she lived in Paris is incorrect, right? And the reason why it is incorrect is because lived ends with ed, right? Meaning that is in the past, right? It is in the past. They watched that movie at the cinema is also the past because it ends with that word is ends with ed, and then the second one is I will talk to Nina. So the word will in front of the verb, it tells us that it needs to happen. It will still happen in the future. So our correct answer is Liz and her friends jump high, right? Because it's something that they are doing now. They jump high. So whenever you get something incorrect, it takes you back to the tutorial page where they will basically show you how to do it, right? And they will give you a breakdown explanation of the present tense, the past tense, the future tense, as well as what the correct answer is, right? Here it says Liz and her friends jump high. So the verb jump has no ending, and that tells us about something that is happening now. It tells us about the present. All right, so we've got that. Okay, so we're going back to our page and we're going to the next lesson, which is select the sentence that tells us about the past, right? So I'm only going to read the explanation of the past, right? Which is this. So some verbs tell us about something that has happened already, right? Or something that has already happened. And we call these verbs, right? Basically, or let's say these verbs tell us about the past, right? And the past, it happened already. And usually the verbs that tells us about the past, they end in ed, right? So you'll have a normal verb, like you'll maybe have a verb, for example, that says jump. So the verb jump and jump, it basically tells us about the present. However, if we were to make mention of something that happened in the past, then we say jumped. And there you can see the ed was added to the end of that verb, right? So jumped. This basically shows that it is in the past. All right, also here's an example. We walked, ed, walked to the store yesterday, right? In the present, we would only walk, but in the past, we walked to the store yesterday. The show started, ed, we added ed to that verb. So the show started last week. And if we were to make mention of the present, then we could say that the show start or starts last week, right? All right. Okay, so now we're going to look at these two examples. It says you need to look at the verb in each sentence. Which of these two tells us about the past? I asked my teacher for help, or I will write with a pen. So, which one tells us about the verb, or which one is a verb? So, I asked my teacher for help, or I will write with a pen. All right, so we're going to say option one is the past tense because here it says the verb asked with the ed, right? It ends in ed and it tells us about something that happened in the past, right? And then the second one, will, right? It tells us about the future. All right, so we're going to the next one. The verb, we need to choose the correct sentence that tells us about the past. He guessed the right answer. So the word guessed the right answer. Mandy will walk her little sister home. So he guessed the right answer, or Mandy will walk her little sister home. We need to choose the correct sentence that tells us about the past. All right, so guessed, right? The word ends with ed, right? That basically tells us that something has happened already. So that is the past. The next sentence, will walk, tells us about the future. All right, one more sentence. Sal stopped the ball with his foot. Or the second one, it says the children dig with their hands. So Sal stopped the ball with his foot, or the children dig with their hands. We need to choose the sentence that tells us about the past. All right, so the word or the sentence that has the verb stopped, right? It ends with ed, right? Which means that this is telling us about the past. It has happened already. And then the children dig with their hands. It tells us about what's happening now, which is the present. So the first sentence, Sal stopped the ball with his foot, is the past tense or tells us about the past. All right, so now if we go to our next activity on the white page, right, or on the whiteboard. All right, so I hope everybody can see. Here it says regular past tense, right? So you need to put an ed in each blank, right? So we are going to put an ed in the blank in order to make that sentence, or let's say the verb, basically to change the verb into the past tense, right? And we'll basically then change the whole sentence into the past tense. Okay, so number one says he talk on the phone, right? Remember, we need to change the sentence into the past tense, right? By adding an ed, which means that we are going to say he talked on the phone, right? She raised her hand, right? So she raised her hand now, but in the past, right? Or let's say yesterday, she raised her hand, right? Which means that we can only put the D because the E plus the D already shows the past tense, right? She turned on the computer, which means that turn is to do something now, but we need to change that to the past tense. So we're going to say she turned on the computer. The duck quack, right? So that is something that is doing now. But if we change that to the past, then we say the duck quacked. The dog bark, right? Something that the dog is doing now. He bark now or barks now. However, in the present, in the past, the dog barked. She opened the door, right? Open tells us about the present. But if we put an ed, then it shows opened the door, shows the past tense, right? So these are regular past tense where we just add an ed to show that it is or it has happened in the past. All right, so now we're going to do before we go into the test, let's go back and we are going to do the activity. We're going to do the lesson. Let's see. Just give me 1 second. All right, so now we're going to select the next lesson, that is select the sentence of the future, and I apologize for that little glitch that we had over there, right? All right, so we're going to select the sentence that tells us about the future, right? So we're only going to look at the description of the future. And some verbs tell us about something that is going to happen, right? And something that is going to happen, we call these verbs future tense, or we say it's future, right? So these verbs tell us about the future. It tells us that something is going to happen. So whenever something is going to happen, right, then they will use the word will in front of the verb within that sentence. So will and the verb will tell us that it is going to happen, and it tells us about the future. For example, we will walk to the park this week. So the word will, it already gives us an indication that they are telling us about the future, right? Something that is going to happen. The party will start, right? So will to happen, going to start, right? Will start tells us about the future. All right, so we're going to let the one example over here, right? Look at the verb in each sentence. Which one tells us about the future, right? Between these two. Is it I will wash the windows next week, or she puts on her hat? We need to choose the correct sentence that tells us about the future. Is it I will wash the windows next week or next, or she puts on her hat? All right, so will wash, right? So the word will in front of the verb wash, it tells us something that is going to happen, right? And it tells us about the future. The second sentence, she puts on a hat, it is something that she's doing now. It is happening now. So our correct answer is the first sentence, which is she or I will wash the windows next. The next one says, the snow will stop in the morning. And the teacher Rose's picture. We need to choose the correct sentence that tells us about the future, right? In the first sentence, the snow will stop in the morning. So the word will, right? Will in front of the verb stop. It tells us that something is going to happen. Will stop, right? And it tells us about the future. Second sentence, light, something that is happening now, right? Sorry, it's happened already. Light, there's ed, right? Ed at the end tells us that it has happened already, which means that the first sentence that tells us about the future is the snow will stop in the morning. So will stop in the morning. All right, so now we're going to do the test, right, on selecting the sentence that tells us about the future. So which sentence tells us about the future? Deb opens the pink box. We will eat outside. Jane ate the last piece of cake. Or Jack is swimming with Megan. We need to choose the correct sentence that tells us about the future. All right, so we're going to choose the second option, which is we will eat outside, right? Because will in front of the verb eat, it tells us about something that must happen, right? So if you have that, then well done. We will watch Nina's game. Dad laughs with his sister. Jane made dinner for us last week. Mike eats his croissant. Which sentence tells us about the future? All right, so we're going to say we will watch Nina's game, right? Because the word will in front of the verb watch, it tells us about the future. It must still happen. Well done to those who got that correct. All right, so that is the lessons on select the sentences that tells us about the present, select the sentence that tells us about the past, select the sentence that tells us about the future. And these are all verb tenses, right? And we say that the sentences that tells us about the present, it either has no ending or it ends in a, and it's telling us about something that is happening now. And the sentences that tells us about the past, it usually ends in ed, and it tells us about something that has happened already. And then the sentences that tells us about the future, it usually has the word will in front of the verb, right? And that tells us about something that must still happen. All right, so before we end our lesson, can you go to aplusclasses.ca, and we go to our learning material. Once you're by learning material, you're going to click on reading. Then you scroll right down up until you get to the four purple boxes, right? The first one says beginners phonics books, reading fluency. Third one says read along audiobook level 1. So we're going to go to the read along audiobooks level 1. All right, so once you are on the audiobooks level 1, let's go to A Hot Summer Day. We're going to read the first book, which is A Hot Summer Day. All right. All right, so that is the storybook or the audio storybook on a hot summer's day, right? And also the audiobooks, it helps with pronunciation, and also the short stories also very good when it comes to learning how to read. So, grade ones, thank you very much for joining the class today and the lesson on verb tenses. Until next time, goodbye.